So innovation. Now, sometimes things don't go well. What's that guy wearing? Yeah, it was the Google headset. Okay. Sometimes technologies don't work out. Autonomous. I'm doing research, or I've done a couple of articles on journal articles on autonomous vehicles. So it's kind of near my heart. And the interesting thing about autonomous vehicles still is there are still a vast number of technological, what I think, difficulties that have yet really to get there. And one of the things that I've also read that isn't talked about is that the difficulty with taking your mind off the highway with autopilot is as bad or even worse than with cruise control. Because think about it. If things are, everything seems to be under control, then are you paying close attention to what's going on in the highway? And so, as I've said, innovation is a great idea, but it doesn't always lead to success. And here's some of the other reasons why. The first is there is no gigantic market. A single unified market doesn't necessarily exist. Markets are fragmented. Electric vehicles have caught on with a core of individuals, and they can live in that market and be very happy and do well for a long time. This is the thing that Apple has done to their great success. There can be economic government constraints that will take your particular product and shelve it into obsolescence. You don't have to say anything about capital shortages right now. There are 50,000 Ford trucks that are parked in Cincinnati, Ohio right now. Does anybody know why?
We're waiting for chips.
Yes. You know what's the biggest problem with chips? There's a guy, by the way, I talked about him already, influencer. His name is Scotty Kilman. Scotty's got 5.15 million YouTube followers. And Scotty was talking about the chip shortage. And the problem is that the technology that's inside automobiles is actually 3 generations behind the chips that are out there now. So the problem is there's really only 2 or 3 world manufacturers that are making chips that are compatible with automobiles. And this is an example how just one thing can make a difference. All right. On a supply chain line that is narrow and tenuous, all it takes is a snap. I know you've talked about supply chain. Anybody take supply chain yet? Okay, so supply chain is great. What is interesting, did y'all talk about just-in-time manufacturing and resource management? I did all of that. I worked for a parachute manufacturer. One of the difficulties that you find is we're seeing a transition in manufacturing now from just-in-time to just-in-case, all right? You're actually seeing warehouses being restocked again because quite simply is they've gotten a black eye over everything that's happening right now. Development costs many times have killed great ideas that they just simply can't get over the top. And that quite simply, it costs more to develop it than it does actually to succeed. Sometimes short development time leaves you not enough time to pull out all the bugs. And then you do something silly like when they, what was the first version? Showed off Windows ME at one of their conferences and it crashed. It did a blue screen of death. Oops. Timing of launch can be bad. Sometimes it's all about where you are at the moment. The interesting thing about this, before code, just to let you know, I'm QM certified. So it means I've hit a certification to teach online. A year before COVID happened, I was in a meeting, the MBA meeting, where they wanted all of us teachers who teach masters to become QM certified and come up with an online program. And this is 6 months before the lockdown happened. And so incredibly, when March came around and we all had to leave, we had everything set up and nailed down for our students. And the rest is history. Now we're over 20,000. We have over 200 master's students, folks. We had 12 at one time, okay? It just gives you an idea. Sometimes time means everything, okay? And then finally, you can have lack of organizational support. Quite simply, this is what killed. I was reading about the Microsoft Courier again because it's such a fascinating subject. 2018, 2019, we're actually talking about relaunching the Courier. Microsoft had come up with these new patents on hinge technologies, and there was that speculation. But this lack of support within the organization can be more hurtful than anything that can happen. So you're not going to have to know this budgeting kind of thing, but it does kind of help you to know this is kind of the steps, these 5 steps when it comes to launching any successful product. And the most important one in here to start with success to me is always the idea screening. When you first come up with ideas, no ideas are bad, and that's the important thing. Brainstorming means that you consider all possibilities. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of these, and we'll only worry about those two when the answer is what goes on the test. The first is venture teams. So as I talked about yesterday, venture teams are when 2 corporations come together, create a third corporation, and those corporations work in simpatico with the 2 parent corporations. So I wanted to do this. Let me go back out, and I didn't email me this, so let me go do that right now. So this is the joint venture, United Motor Manufacturing, Inc. And this was what was created in Fremont, California. And this was the connection between GM and Toyota. Started in 1984. First started putting together the Chevy Nova, the Toyota Corolla, and as I said before, they were bolt for bolt the same ones, all right? Until Chevy or until GM decided, well, we've had enough of this. And the reason why, quite simply, is they were bolt for bolt and people were still buying Corollas. I said Corolla, I was wrong. Now, the interesting thing about this plant that they created that was so successful is that the plant is now owned by Tesla. And so Tesla bought this factory, and now this factory is the one that is used in Fremont. So, you know, one thing spills on to another, to another, to another. As far as this was actually, it was a great success for GM, maybe more than Toyota. And the reason why is that GM, one thing was that GM was able to learn the practices that Toyota in their factories in Japan were practicing. And that led to almost 2 decades of perfection by GM. It was a very meaningful kind of relationship. It also streamlined their own departmental interactions as well. It became an innovation, if you want to be, for the lack of a better word. And it became very successful between the two. And this is what a joint venture is. Now, a skunk works is something a little bit different. So a skunk works is only one corporation. And what that one corporation does is it takes individuals from different departments, one individual from computers, one individual from management, one individual from operations, one individual from distribution, puts those people together, puts them in a separate, unique location, and asks them to come up with a new idea. So the history of Lockheed, which is one of the great innovative airline companies or air companies in the world, in the 50s especially, started with an individual by the name of Kelly Johnson. And what Kelly Johnson did was he was given contracts by the United States to come up with designs of planes that were just simply impossible for the day. And so what Kelly Johnson did was he took this special elite group, put them out in the desert in California. They got their name as the Skunk Works because literally there were critters crawling everywhere and they had to be de-skunked, all right? And just gave them the opportunity and the freedom to come up with ideas and designs that had not been thought of before. The output of this was the SR-71. Does anybody know what the SR-71 is? Its nickname is the Blackbird, all right? It's the fastest of this, to this moment, the fastest jet. It was actually a spy jet that has ever been created. The plane flies at 95 to 100,000 feet. The individuals who are in it have to be also astronaut trained. The SR-73 leaks when it takes off because as it goes in the air, it expands by 2 inches because it goes at 2,000 miles an hour. It has to be fueled in the air, otherwise all the fuel would drain out. And with all of that, it has not been equal as a jet. I believe I read that it was shot at 38 times in their life and nothing that's ever gotten close to it. But this is an idea what a skunk work does. It allows corporations to come up with ideas separate from the corporate structure themselves. And when smart individuals have the freedom, they come up with great ideas like that. Grace Hopper, who came up with COBOL, was one of those individuals. She was called the mother of the modern Navy. She taught a generation of Navy personnel programming languages. So getting individuals away, and that's where new product development can happen. So I don't want you to get into this real thick. I mean, I really don't. You're not going to have a question as solved as we go through. But I do want you to know some things, like some of these one at a time. And so one of these is, how do you come up with ideas? One of the greatest resources that we can come up with are our employees and our customers. And that's the brand communities that we have can come up with outstanding ideas. Sometimes if we just listen to it. Now, the difficulty with that also is that sometimes the outsiders might have their own specific ideas, their own little pet peeves. So it requires a bit of screening. But once again, in the creation or the generation of ideas, they need to come from outsiders. Yes, you must study your competitors for several reasons. One of them is you don't want to be exactly like your competitors. You must have some unique benefit that drives your customers to want to go to you. Otherwise, the only reason they'll choose is price. Now, adopting creativity techniques or idea kinds of plantings that are processes to help you think And once again, I'm not going to go into too much on that, but let me just show you one idea if you've never heard this. So there's what's called a heuristic ideological technique, or HIT, okay? And what HIT does is it lines up the characteristics of an item on one side and the characteristics of another item on the other side. And what you do is that somewhere in here, you find where those items might stay together. Once again, I'm kind of going on. So the characteristics, this actually was true, the characteristics of a blade of grass and the characteristics of stone. So this actually happened, and this is what came up with pre-stressed concrete, all right? The bending or the stretching of iron bars in concrete, at which point once they were stretched, you poured concrete in, allowed it to set, and then unstretch those iron bars, meant that concrete could actually flex. And so this is where that whole concept came from the very beginning. This is an example of a creativity technique. One of the ways that you can be creative is to list all the characteristics. And once you see the characteristics, see it where it takes you. Next week, I'm going to talk about non-fungible tokens because I'm doing writing and research on that. And I think a lot of the things that happen with cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens, quite simply, is because we're viewing it from 5 feet off the ground. But if you look at it from 50,000 feet and understood the characteristics of where it's going, and that's where my research is going, you can get a greater understanding of where the future might possibly be. So some of these are other things that we all kind of know. You want to trade, trade shows, and when we go to conferences, besides drink, we also talk to each other quite a bit. All right. I changed from computer programming to marketing when I went to my first marketing party. And I said, these are my people, all right? So trade shows are a great place to be able to bat ideas back and forth, okay? And, sometimes listening to just fly on the wall kinds of things, you can come up with ideas that you never had. I have been blind to cryptocurrencies and all these things, and I've had 2 individuals in our department who have talked about them for years, and it didn't seem real. And then I read a couple of journal articles, and it's like the ultimate whack in the head. I understood it. And I understood it from an article from Journal of Intellectual Property. And that's the article, the one that I needed to make me understand everything. So I talked about heuristic techniques. I don't want you to go any further than those. But sometimes it requires you to spend time just thinking of things in the air to be able to come up with what you would consider to be new ideas, okay? And of course, we're always going to have things that will fight new ideas. And one of the difficulties, if you have good ideas, folks, is not to get discouraged. I get discouraged too quickly. And that's why I don't talk about things quite a bit, because I would rather have them out and journalized before, because someone's always got an opinion and I take it too much to heart. And I ask you too, is that if you've got a good idea, be careful how you share it, okay? Because the one thing about ideas are that they're fungible, all right? And somebody can take that idea. There's an old saying in marketing, a good idea is steal one. So when you get deeper into it, once you've come up with this 2,000 numbered list of ideas, you have to come up with some reasonable way of achieving success. And so if you're looking at autonomous vehicles right now, you have these steps that you have to think of. First is the probability of technical completion. Next is whether it can be commercially feasible. And the third, which usually is asked first, is whether it's economically successful. Now, what Ford did when he came out was he actually had two pieces of this formula in. Yes, it was technically possible, and yes, it was commercial. But this economic success in automobiles at the turn of the century was still in question. And what Ford did was say, I'm going to solve this problem by making sure that any individual in the United States could own it. And once he solved that part, he came up with success. So these are my questions when it comes to autonomous. The things with autonomous vehicles, technical completion has yet to be finished. All right. You can't drive autonomous vehicles in snow. It jams up. All right. Commercialization, given it, you're looking at cars costing $85,000 now. All right. So there's two pieces of puzzles that are difficult. And the other thing about this also is, and I've done my research, is there's a concept known as locus of control. It's the ability of an individual consumer needs to be able to grab control of the situation, and that those individuals with a high locus of control have a high rate of fear when it comes to autonomous vehicles. So that's another thing. But if you put these ideas in your head and you focus on them in this way, you have a way of being able to determine whether or not you're going to be successful. So I'm not going to worry about the concept development and those kind of things. In concept testing, the two most important things, they're actually connected to each other, is perceived value and purchase intention. Willingness to buy is maybe one of the most important things. You think it's silly, but no matter how many good marks you get about an item, about how good it is, if consumers aren't going to purchase it, then in essence, there's failure. In marketing, we believe value is everything. So I'm sure you saw my recording when I talked about value versus satisfaction. And I talk about, does anyone go into Walmart and say, man, I'm satisfied. It was good. I enjoyed that. We hate it. I mean, we do. All right. There's no doubt about it. And yet we go back to Walmart again and again and again. And the reason why isn't for satisfaction, but for value. And that's not a bad thing. And the core of Walmart's value is that they have the best channels of distribution in the world, no doubt about it. The value that Walmart brings is indicative of the fact that they're the largest retailer in the world. They make 5 times more a year than Amazon does. I don't know if you knew that. They make $500 to $600 billion. Amazon's anywhere from 85 to 100 billion. They can do things that Amazon can't because they have a retail network that is unparalleled. They have 1.5 million employees in the United States, 2.6 million in the world. By the way, their their consumer satisfaction went up by 10% in 2018. You know why? You know how? They gave everyone a raise. That's all it took. Is you make your employees happy and you make your customers happy. Walmart, by the way, has announced that they're giving another employee raise. I think this was last year, and they have a series of planned raises coming up. So, you know, smarter than, all right? Maybe they can learn their lesson. But purchase intention and perceived value are the two of the most important. So, characteristics of a particular item can be as important to success as to the functions that it performs. But because there are so many different ways of making things, it is in those differences that can be confusing for consumers. And so what you try to do ultimately, other than models with significant differences, you don't want to put out the same model many times with multiple different attachments, for the lack of a better word. And so what you do, and you do this also in supply chain, is you create what's known as conjoint analysis. The conjoint analysis is basically the utility values, okay, that consumers attach to different attributes of the same product. And so we have three nozzles here for the vacuum, A, B, and C. One nozzle is straight, the other nozzle is tilted, and the third one is angled but thinner as well. Now, the attributes can be tangible and they can be intangible as well. They can be physical attributes and they can be attributes such as you earned a good housekeeping seal. You have a longer warranty. Those are examples of intangible attributes that also need to be studied as well. So what you need to do is you need to run a conjoint analysis. You run research with a whole bunch of individuals, and you do things like this. When consumers look at it, they say the package design is best as B. They like that design better. I can't do anything about the brand name, but if my name is Bissell, I sure hope it works. If I look at retail price, there's no big shock. $1.19 has a higher value than $1.59 does. But here's where you have to look at things. $1.39 substantially different from $1.19. And the only real way you can do is not look at this. You have to do statistical analysis. You need to do regression. And you need to see in the regression if there's a statistical difference between this and this. Because you might more logically want to do $1.39 instead of $1.19, because there's also the perception that individuals have that money or cost or price equals value. So you might want to do $1.39. So the good housekeeping seal, yes, it's higher, but I would want to do a regression here and see if there's any statistical difference between the two. The good housekeeping seal means that I have to send it off to a lab, get it approved by them, and then I get the seal back. And maybe I don't want to spend my money that way. And then, of course, the money back guarantee, it is higher. Without being able to go into regression, I don't know if it's substantially different, but I would say yes. And so package B, named Bissell, with a retail price of $1.39, with a money back guarantee. This is how the conjoint analysis all kind of comes together and tells me those are all the attributes that consumers consider to have the most value. I do not like the word utility, because utility basically means, to me, it means a quantitative value output. And in many times, this is a purely esoteric thing. And so I prefer value as the word. Thaler in 1986, he did the work on utility, and he's the one that kind of spelled out utility as a value. And yet, because he was an economist, he called it utility, and marketers would call it value. Tip of that. So you test the concept, you go through, kind of put together a target market. Then what you also do is you actually take it out and you test it and see whether your idea is successful. So I'm not going to go into these items, and I want you to skim by them. I don't want you to worry about this, but I want you to know what market testing is, okay? So market testing happens when you choose a metropolitan area that is similar to the target market in which you are trying to sell to. Sure. Market testing involves finding a commercial area that is similar to the larger market in which you wish to sell it. So these are what are known as tier 2 or tier 3 cities. These are not large cities, anywhere from 50 to 100,000 in size. Yes.
Cleveland, like a really well-known one.
Yeah, it is. Cleveland actually in Cleveland has moved from a tier 1 to a tier 2, and they are a pretty good one. You find a lot of smaller, the reason they go to smaller cities, like between 50 and 150,000, is because it's a more volatile mix and you get faster results that way too, all right? There's actually a body of research that says, just give me 20,000 people and that's enough to do it, a test market, okay? So you test the market and you see the success. If it's successful in that given market, then you know it's going to be successful elsewhere. This happens a lot, well, it did happen a lot in the movie industry. So the movie industry would release a film maybe 2 months before its actual firm release to judge audience acceptance. So there are all sorts of stories about how great ones came about. The release of Star Wars 6 months before the actual Star Wars came out saved Star Wars, by the way. Any of you need to read a story of George Lucas's wife and how she saved Star Wars by editing. It's a great story. You find it on YouTube. But believe me, there's a lot that happens in the test market that determines whether or not you're successful. So this is a true story. Have you ever heard of the potato chip called Zaps? Okay, you can find them in Lowe's or whatever. Zaps are what are known as kettle chips, okay? So kettle chips are different from commercial chips like Lay's because they are put in a gigantic boiling kettle and they're individually boiled, okay? And then they're dried and all the rest of it. Kettle chips tend to be thicker, crisper with a bigger crunch. And so Zaps is a corporation in Louisiana and they make kettle chips, okay? And they come up with all sorts of spicy crawdators and other stuff, and they make a plain chip and whatnot like that. So they started a test market in Baton Rouge. So what that meant is they went to a store that's called an Albertsons, and they contracted with Albertsons to have a certain section of the potato chip aisle so that they could gauge how consumers were liking their product. So went in the store, they put it in the Albertsons. 2 weeks later, all the Zaps were gone. They thought that was pretty cool. So they put them all back. 2 weeks later, they're gone. They put them back again. They come back a week, they're all gone. They put them back, and 2 days later, they're all gone. The Lay's potato chip guy was buying the entire thing to keep them away from consumers. That is the absolute truth. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that can happen in test markets. Well, success went on. Zap is commercial nationwide. Couldn't stop them. But guess what? Guess what Lay's came out with? Kettle chips, exactly. You got it. So once again, if you can't beat them, join them. Okay, let's take a break. We'll do 10 minutes and we'll come back and finish this up. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were a minor?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Tennessee,
How
and it was
cool.
Great because it had to take the electricity there.
No.
Yeah. So this was like very time frame, but
So why are you here? I mean, this is the question I would ask. I mean, if you've been a minor, I mean.
well, we stopped it after around like the end of 2018.
Okay,
Just as things pretty much just ended by then. Yeah. And then after that, everything started to pick up again.
right.
So I kind of got like when Ethereum was like $230 whenever I first started. And I guess over time it's went up to like 1,500 or
Right.
whatever, 18,000. But
Right.
yeah, it was fun to figure out.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, to me as a marketer and to me as a researcher, I'm stunned by it. Just to get an idea of, to me, the indefinable absoluteness of its uniqueness is part of what makes it so special. All right. And non-fungible tokens, I mean, I think we will see non-fungible tokens give away performance. So I'll give you an idea of where my ideas are.
Yeah.
I think I think that the idea of Bitcoin, and I think that the idea of cryptocurrencies, will be one of those things that society is going to have to bake on for a while. But just think of the idea of being able to come up with your own decentralized bank
Yeah.
without having to be in, let's say, a corrupt country. All right. It means that you could raise money, you could loan people money, you could set your own interest rates. And it's just a stunning
Well, yeah,
revelation.
it'd be like a small worldwide
Yeah.
bank or a whole economy would be one currency.
Yeah. I mean,
you don't have to worry about exchange rates. You go tourist, you're a tourist somewhere, you just.
right, you just use a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
There's a true story. In 2010 or 2011, there was a cosplay event. And it was like a national cosplay. And like the first prize was $1,000. And the second prize was, the fifth prize was 10 Bitcoins.
Yeah.
And think about 10 Bitcoins now, it's like $250,000, It's just, it is crazy. It's amazing. Yeah, think about that. Yeah, man. Yeah, I got a dime of Bitcoin, 50 cents. Oh,
Yeah, that's just the easiest way. If you can
Oh, yeah. Well, I like Ethereum's idea because they have a concept of Bitcoin is a fixed and I find that interesting because it's two different ideas that generate the same basic. And kind of, I would be interested to see ultimately which one has more success.
I think Ethereum has more stuff like that, or Bitcoin is more focused on currency.
Right.
So I was doing Ethereum whenever I was mine.
Cool. Yeah, I like Ethereum. I like the concepts. I like the chain, the proof of concept. I think it's fascinating. I'm reading. I mean, once it just sprang in my mind, and really there's no difference. I'm a cryptocurrency and non-fungible. Both of them just
Yeah.
I mean, if one cryptocurrency can be exchanged for another, it's fungible. If it can't, it's non-fungible.
Yeah.
All it needs is just one bit of difference, So, it's just, I've been impressed with the whole thing. I really have. And there's a marketing conference that's going to be in New York in December. I'm writing a research article. And it's going to be the first marketing conference on cryptocurrencies. Oh, really? Yeah. So, it's taken us this long. All right.
Yeah.
We're not as smart as we think we are. I'll be right back. I'm going to speak to you sometime.
Okay.
Like super wealthy from all that.
Yeah.
You make some money off of it.
Yeah, I mean, but it costs 50,000 to build it. I mean, there's like 32 GPUs and
15,000.
yeah, 15,000. It was pretty big.
As an undergrad.
Hold on, it was.
Where was
my
that?
brother? Oh, we went halfway on
That was
it.
in your dorm?
Yeah, and it was great because I have paid electricity, which is like the biggest cost with it. Yeah, you can see like this is like a smaller, like whenever I first started.
So you put that,
And I was like, yeah, but I did all this.
that's crazy.
Yeah. I had 3 motherboards total. But each one did like whole 19 graphics cards. But you can see like this was like the first 2 that I had, and I had to build this out of wood, whatever. And you can see how eventually like that skill like that.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
I have no idea what any of that
I
is.
had to get a weed growing tent to put around the whole thing to keep the heat in. It was so hot in my dorm room.
Oh, yeah?
Super small. And I had like a fan that would suck in air from outside and when it would blow the hot air out.
What did you do with the weed growing tent?
I don't know. My brother asked. We were for the secret service.
It's in a closet. Yeah, I have a friend who claims, I don't know how true this is, he claims that when he was a kid, his dad took like all his birthday money and he's a rich kid to start and all paid him with it. Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
I'm definitely
They were
real.
already.
I had Bitcoin in 2017.
People live a lot of times above what they actually have.
It's true, though, it's true. I believe his dad probably invested the money in more funds, I don't know, essentially his.
I really had enough money to invest. I'm never investing.
I got all my friends, so I'm a little older,
Yeah.
so I've got a 401k and IRA and stuff, but I got my friends in undergrad who left like a year ago. So everyone was like all pumped up about it, making money. And I'm like, just remember, like, once you're up, don't get greedy.
No, you-
Like, if you're happy with it,
Keep
whatever.
buying.
That's exactly what But yeah, you're down, like, you gotta buy now.
Yeah, now would be a good time.
I mean, I don't know if we're at the bottom, but like,
Yeah, I think the stock market is pretty much at the bottom. Like if you invest now, it's only a 4% chance that you're gonna.
if it's retirement, if you're investing with the retirement.
Yeah, you got
Selling that,
Don't worry about it.
just leave that.
And that's what I'm trying to like max out my raw fire for the end of the year. But just got my intention is to invest in as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I work construction, the company has 35% match.
It's crazy.
So like all the money that I've lost in the market downturn is still just a match. So I'm still up in my equity, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I'm just because like I'm still putting into it. Not working.
Yeah, for buying some skills.
So sorry, days removed, you try to change the date so it opens this weekend?
No, go right ahead.
Thank you.
I'll do it from Friday to Monday.
Okay, yeah, it's not set to open until next Tuesday.
I know.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna change up. No, I'll set them all to be Friday to Mondays again. It's just, so much of this class is conversation, but you've got to have the book foundation to get it all right. And I'd much rather take care of all of that somewhere else and besides the classroom.
Yeah.
When you're in a 5-week series like this in a master's class, every second counts, and the rule in I don't know if you've done semester, but the rule is don't get behind because you don't have time to. So yeah, I have no problem with that, sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted to show you, by the way, this is Zapp's chips. So you'll see them in anywhere. So they started out in Baton Rouge and of course in Louisiana. And of course you see the Louisiana kind of vibe to it, So They're hot, believe me. You'll need a beer or your favorite beverage. And they're crunchy and spicy, and they have plain versions as well. And they've become pretty successful. The guy, or Dr. Babin, the wine snob, is the guy who did the marketing for this corporation. So
What's your favorite beer?
I've gone back and forth. I'm starting to like Modelo now. Believe it or not, folks, I've been a Miller fan for most of my life. All right, I'm not a beer snob. I had some excellent beers like Gull when I was in Iceland. I tend to like, I'm not much in the, in all of the different things. I will drink just about anything I have. Doesn't need to help me. But just for an average sitting around the afternoons, I have a Miller, and I'll never forget, I had some of my professor friends over who were beer snobs. And I gave them the beer with a cozy on it, so they never saw the label, and they're like, "Hey, this is good beer. What is it?" I'm good Miller. It's like, no.
What's your
Shattered.
favorite, what's your favorite brewery is it?
Oh, now you got me. The breweries here have had people in my class, so I have A and B and also the other one. I've got the very first can, by the way, up in my office that they ever brewed, A and B. And not the first can, but part of the first set. And what's the other one? Boonshine? Yeah, I've got one of their first ones up there as well. I like both of them. I really do. I like the fact that A and B's got their own place because that's critically important. The interesting thing about that, talk about innovation and how to think of things in the channel of distribution. When they first started out, of course, they did small lot sizes. But how do you can in small lot sizes? What there's a corporation out there that will bring an entire cannery on a flatbed, back you up, will can it, I think it's like a minimum 5,000 cans, slap the label on you, it's all on one machine and drive off. So you don't need a cannery to be able to do it. Now they do. Now they got a big enough place to do all of that. But I like A and B and I like Boonshine. Are they my favorite beers? Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. Like I said, I've never turned, man rule number one, never turn a beer down, okay? And I'll never turn a beer down. So, and I always give a beer out. You come to my house, I'll give out a beer. So you're invited to my house.
Well, Moonshine does have its own place now.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Where?
It's by Mount Deer Village. It's huge.
Really?
Yeah, they have like, yeah, I think it's giving A&B a run for their money because A&B redid their whole like,
Is that the place
outside
out
area.
where by the soccer field?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I don't
right,
know for
drove by
sure,
there.
but they have like a lot of outdoor seating there, and I think A&B's redone their outdoor seating, so I didn't know if it was because of.
I've
Moonshine.
been there. I didn't know Moonshine owned it. I'll be darned. Yeah, the hamburgers are awesome.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, well, good for them. With breweries and all like that, and the thought is, once again, you got to go to the core product. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to give out relaxation, the freedom, the enjoyment, and what is more natural than having a place to do that? Now, we'll say that they need umbrellas out there because it's hot outside. So other than that, they're great at it.
What about Lost Province?
I like Lost Province too. I like their pails. And there were some things that I didn't like eating at Lost Province, but now that the pork chop sandwich is just wicked. All right, I love that. And I'm on keto now, so I'm not supposed to eat bread. And so I just tore it away and eat pork chop. I've lost 15 pounds. Keeping it up. Yes. All right. So without further ado, let us move on. So market testing eventually leads to commercialization, and the win timing is always one of those things. And we talked about this in the discussion about the product life cycle. Is the win is always the big issue. Who wants to be first? Timing is everything. So we talked about one of the things that you get if you're the first entry in any new industry is you get to set the rules. You get to set the parameters. It also means that you have to do the education of consumers. You have to do all of the advertising to introduce it. You're the ones that have to overcome all of the objections and all of those things that go with the first entry. Parallel entry is possible, and it takes timing to do it right. But parallel entry with another company actually can be better for both companies. Why? Because it brings gravitas to the industry. To basically what it states is that this industry is substantial enough for two companies to jump in at the same time. Parallel entry also means that both sets of advertising feed upon each other and creates a general acceptance that's normally not expected. The difficulty with parallel entry, unfortunately, is that generally only one company wins, or one is going to have to be number one. And then the late entry can be done, or late entries are really done to allow the first corporation to bear all the costs of adoption in the market. Because many times it'll reveal flaws in either the way that that particular product is, and you might have the ability of compensating or at least doing some advertising to be able to minimize that.
Like pharmaceuticals.
Yes. Yes. Good example. Yeah. You can also change the formulas a little bit. So, not that I know anything about it, but the little blue pill, when it came out. Oh, well, there's actually one pill and then the other is Cialis, and they're both different because they have different formulas, but in essence, they're the same thing, okay? One has a formula for 4 hours and another one's for 21. Here. I'm gonna keep going. But they're basically the same thing, the same approach, and Cialis has actually gone ahead of the other. Anyway, so it just depends. Parallel entries, when we went from the original 8088 processors to the 80286 processors, the first real 16-bit, 32-bit processors out there, IBM was not the first corporation to launch with a faster machine. It was first launched by a company called Kpro and then Compaq right after that. And they were the ones that came out with 286 machines, and IBM allowed them to go ahead and do it because they waited to see how the market developed. And when their 286 processor came out, it killed the rest of the market. So that's usually a larger corporation, if it's, an especially unique industry, may wait and watch somebody else dip their toe in it before they actually get into it themselves. Microsoft has done a lot of that as well. Office systems, Microsoft Office was not the first one out there, it was the last. And of course, it's the one that won. Novell had one. Borland International had one. They were all great systems. IBM bought Lotus 123 and bought another one, but the winner was Microsoft. Because quite simply, is Microsoft's, they put a lot of money into their Office innovation and they achieved successfully. So the first entry doesn't necessarily win, but chances are, so. Development to commercialization, generally you're racing against competitors. And it all depends on what you want to do. Now, with the iPad and with Apple, they always want to be first with it, quite simply because they want to define the rules of what their product is, and I get it, all right? The Samsung may have come out with their watch first, but their watch was more cell phone internet based, and that's not what the Apple Watch is. And that's why it's achieved some success. So the last thing to talk about this is how do we get consumers to adopt? Trial is first, adoption is second. And adoption is when you consider yourself a regular user. And so, like everything, there are stages to the adoption process, and these are the stages that marketers go through ultimately when they're trying to determine whether or not a particular product is going to be or is successful or not. All right. And so these steps are awareness. The consumer becomes aware of a given product, but they lack the information about that particular product. So awareness is what we call an arousal state. It's kind of an immediate reaction, okay? Emotion is actually an evaluative state, okay? You know, evaluation is an emotion. So awareness, I do not have any information on it. You get enough information and the consumer is stimulated by that, and then that piques their interest. And so if I use the liquid laundry detergent scenario, you might have heard that there was liquid laundry detergent, but you may not be interested in it. But then you learn enough about liquid laundry detergent or through your other situation, and then you have an interest in it. Evaluation basically is your consideration whether or not to try the innovation. Trial is when the consumer tries it to see whether their estimation of value for that particular product is accurate or not. And then finally, adoption is when the consumer decides to take a full or a regular use of that particular item. So when I go back to the gain idea, you can see why they wanted to do whatever they could to get you to try it, all right? That's why they did 62 million bottles of two-use gains. Is because this whole part in here, the awareness, interest, and evaluation can take a while. But I give you something free, and you're happy, you're almost there. This is why trial things are given out all the time. All the time they give out trial things, free pizza, free anything. You know, just to get you to try it means that you're already on step 4. And actually, what you find is like, especially if you're buying an automobile, they're trying to squeeze this as small and as short as they can. What's the first thing that they tell you if you go to a place and drive looking for an automobile?
About 160 days.
Why don't you go drive it home for the weekend and see what it feels like? Exactly. Go drive it for 60 days. We're okay. Just put your signature right there. You got your credit card, right? Okay. That's the reason why. Okay. Is because now the stages are not, what's the word I want to use? The stages are not just consistent and take the same amount of time all the way through. Sometimes they're just leaps and bounds. And it depends also on the perceived risk in the evaluation, trial, and adoption. So the perceived risks, psychological, safety, any of those other risks, social, all of those can be reasons why you don't adopt it. So like when you get your master's degree and you go out and buy a car, who wants a minivan? Nobody? You would be quite dead in a minivan. I would, I've got kids, all right? Yeah, and I have no shame anyway. Social risk is another reason many times why we won't adopt this. Is quite simply is that the perception of having something means that we're accepting of something that's broader. And so in the stages of the adoption trial, the fastest thing they can do is get to the trial. Okay, fastest thing they can do. So, having said that, let me also for a second go back to this article here on the process of innovation. All right. And so we talked about this with the product life cycle. But if you notice in this article by Tom Robertson, there's also a thing they talk about is the diffusion process. I urge you to read this. It's a really good article, easy to read. Okay. And in 1967, he's the one who came up with this particular slide that we're using now. Okay. So it's really, really kind of unique. He's the one who came up with this idea in the first place. And so if you look at this influencing in the adoption process, the thing that we're using in the 15th edition of Kotler Keller, this goes back almost 40 or 50 years. And why? Because it's useful, all right? And it does help us to understand how ready individuals are or not when it comes to accepting new products. And so we classify these groups as the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. So once again, in our desire and our need to be able to picture individuals, we come up with these definitions of each one of these. So usually the innovators are technology enthusiasts. They tend to be middle to upper income. They will try things just out of adventure. They are happy to continue with high prices. They are people who like to alpha and beta test. They're willing to do that. And they're individuals who are very, very distinct in their desires, and they are willing to criticize. These are the 2.5% who will buy your product no matter what. Early adopters are what we call opinion leaders. And they search for new technologies, but they're looking for a competitive advantage. They have more reason in the way that they purchase. They are not price sensitive or less price sensitive. And if they come up with a personalized solution from them, they are very readily accepted. They like good service as well. The early majority are the pragmatists. They will look at an item and pick it up when the benefits equal the cost. In essence, when you get to the early majority, the adoption process has been complete. They're like the mainstream. And here's the thing also, the early majority, the people that they listen to are the early adopters. And so if I'm trying to find influence here, I'm trying to influence the satisfaction of the early majority. Because if I can satisfy them, then the early majority, early adopters, the early majority will look to the early adopters to see whether or not that product is satisfied or not. And if you look at just this group, that's half of all of the individuals right there, almost half. And so initial success is determined on how well I can satisfy this 13.5% right here, because they influence this 34%. These are the influencers, the influence marketing people. These are the people on YouTube like Scotty Kilmer. These are the individuals who are going to spread their wealth to others. The late majority are skeptical and risk averse, very price sensitive. By this time, the product has reached its growth and is now in a maturity. They may be adopting newer models, but those are newer models that have already been replaced by newer models. And so they tend to be the second wave when it comes to innovation, can be even the third. And finally, the last are the laggards. They resist innovation until status quo is no longer defended. They basically don't have anywhere else to go. And one of the things about it that runs through the adoption of innovations is personal influence all the way through, all right? And that's kind of what marketing has to state, is that personal influence moves across the system, because once the emerging majority adopts it, then you're into the growth and maturity phases, and then the late majority has to come along with you, all right? It works. We got to get the influencers. So, what are some of the factors that influence the adoption process? These are what are called the characteristics of any successful innovation. So relative advantage is the degree to which an innovation appears superior. And for me, innovations are always easier, bigger, and simpler. This is the problem that DVD recorders had, is that quite simply, they were too difficult to adopt. And whereas with a DVR, you've got something playing, you hit record. That's also why, who was it, Dish Network integrated with their DVR recorders so that you could just look at what's coming up and hit and record that. Anybody have YouTube TV? Does the same thing. Yeah, YouTube TV does it as well. I thought that was brilliant. Compatibility. Is it consistent? It sounds strange. Is it consistent with my own personal experiences and values? It is no secret that 4K TV is downwardly compatible with high def, even though you can't get the 4K. Compatibility is extremely important. Also, DVDs and Blu-rays, they use the exact same format. Of course, they're 4 times as dense, but they look the exact same because it's more reasonable for consumers to consider them that way. When we went from vinyl records, we had a choice either to go to cassette tapes, which they did, or to CDs. And there was a certain amount of differences in there. There was also another format called DAT, digital audio tape, that required, very unique circumstances and equipment to set up and it didn't work, okay? Complexity, the degree to which it's difficult to understand. And so relative advantage and complexity are very, very closely connected together. There's a reason why your watches look like your watches. Even digital watches look like watches, all right? That ability to be able to familiarize yourself immediately is important. Divisibility means, can I try it? Can I try it on a limited basis? Sampling is extremely important. It's why you find, if you go into a Sam's Club, they've got somebody there cooking something and giving out samples. And then finally, communicability is the degree to which the advantages are observable and that they are describable to others. And so all of these are vital components to the success and the adoption of any product. And realize that all of these things are in the eyes of the consumer. Because the people who came up with the DVD recorders didn't think they were going to come out with a bomb. They thought they had everything. They thought it was the bomb, but it wasn't. And so this is why market research and why test markets are extremely important, to be able to dig out these particular facts, because all of these influence the characteristics of any innovation that influence whether or not those products will be adopted or not. And so finally, just the last kind of blurb, are organizations ready to adopt innovations? Many are, many aren't. The thing that you find, innovations tend to be more ready to be adopted also comes to whether or not the organizations are in some kind of trouble, let's put it that way. Continuous innovation within organizations is vital, just as much as it is important for them to be constantly upgrading the personnel in their organizations. Because if you're willing or you're asking for consumers to accept and adopt innovations, then the organizations themselves must be willing to make those same commitments. Okay, folks, we're done. I will have these up online by this afternoon. I'll change the timing on these, and we will see you come Monday, okay? All right, folks. Have a good day.